Imagine discovering a substance that could make you see things that weren't there, change the way you felt pain, put you into a deep sleep, or completely alter your sense of reality. Now imagine discovering it, thousands of years before modern science even existed. No laboratories, no pharmaceutical companies, no modern doctors, just humans, plants, fungi, and centuries of experimentation. Throughout history, people have used some incredibly strange substances. Some were medicines, some were used in religious ceremonies, some were used to relieve pain, and some were simply used because people wanted to experience something completely different. So today, we're going on a journey through some of the craziest drugs and mind altering substances you've probably never heard of. And the strangest part? These aren't fictional drugs from a movie. People actually use them. Let's start with something that sounds almost harmless: peyote. Peyote is a small cactus native to parts of Mexico and the southwestern United States. For centuries, indigenous peoples used peyote in spiritual and ceremonial traditions. The cactus contains mescaline, a powerful psychedelic compound that can dramatically alter perception. People may experience vivid changes in color, patterns, emotions, and their sense of reality. But here's what makes its history fascinating. For the communities that used it traditionally, this wasn't simply a recreational substance, it was connected to ceremony, spirituality, healing traditions, and community. The substance wasn't the whole story. The culture surrounding it mattered just as much. And then there's something even stranger: a substance that comes from a fungus. So it's called ergot. Ergot can grow on grains such as rye, and historically, people sometimes consumed contaminated grain without realizing what was growing on it. The consequences could be horrifying. Ergot poisoning could cause severe pain, muscle spasms, confusion, hallucinations, and other serious symptoms. Large outbreaks of ergot poisoning occurred in parts of Europe throughout history. People didn't understand the chemistry behind it. They simply knew that something was terribly wrong. But centuries later, scientists began studying the compounds produced by ergot, and those studies became an important part of the history of pharmacology. A tiny fungus growing on grain ended up helping scientists discover powerful chemicals. Now let's go back even further to the mandrake. The mandrake plant became famous in ancient and medieval medicine. Its root contains compounds that can affect the nervous system. Historical physicians experimented with mandrake preparations for things like pain and sleep. But there was a serious problem. The plant could be extremely dangerous. Too much could produce severe poisoning. And eventually, the mandrake became surrounded by legends. Stories claimed that its strange looking root had magical powers, and some folklore even imagined that pulling it from the ground could produce a terrifying scream. The reality was already strange enough. Humans had discovered a plant that could dramatically affect the brain, without understanding exactly why. Then we have henbane. Henbane is another ancient plant with powerful effects on the nervous system. Historical sources describe it as narcotic, and sometimes associated it with altered consciousness and hallucinations. It was also used in traditional medicine, but like many substances on this list, the difference between an intended medical effect and poisoning could be dangerously small. And that's a pattern you'll see again and again throughout human history. People discovered that certain plants could change the body, but they didn't have modern chemistry to explain what was happening. They were learning through observation, tradition, and sometimes terrible mistakes. Another famous example is belladonna. The name literally means beautiful woman, but the plant can be extremely poisonous. Belladonna contains compounds such as atropine and scopolamine. Historically, preparations from the plant were used for various purposes, and its effects became part of both medicine and folklore. The strange part is that scientists eventually isolated and studied these compounds, and some of their chemical relatives became important in modern medicine. So a plant surrounded by superstition ended up contributing to scientific knowledge. But not every strange substance came from Europe or the Middle East. In the Andes, people have used coca leaves for thousands of years. Coca was deeply connected to indigenous cultures and traditional practices. The leaves contain naturally occurring stimulant compounds. People use them for their stimulating effects, including helping with the physical demands of life at high altitude. But there's an extremely important distinction. Traditional coca leaves are not the same thing as purified cocaine. Modern cocaine is a concentrated chemical substance derived from coca. The history of the coca leaf is much older and much more complicated than the modern drug associated with its name. And then, there's one of the most famous ancient substances of all: opium. Humans have used the opium poppy for thousands of years. Ancient civilizations recognized that preparations from the poppy could reduce pain and cause sleepiness. For centuries, physicians experimented with opium preparations as medicines. Eventually, scientists isolated specific compounds from opium, including morphine. That changed medicine forever, but it also revealed the enormous risk of powerful drugs. Something that could relieve severe pain could also lead to dependence and potentially deadly poisoning. And that's what makes the history of drugs so complicated. There isn't always a simple line between medicine, poison, ritual, and addiction. The same substance can play completely different roles depending on the culture, the preparation, and the dose. And that's perhaps the biggest lesson hidden inside this strange history. Our ancestors weren't stupid. They were experimenting with the natural world, trying to understand their bodies, trying to treat pain, trying to communicate with the spiritual world, and sometimes simply trying to experience something beyond ordinary reality. They didn't have modern laboratories, but they had thousands of years of observation. They learned which plants mattered, which substances were dangerous, which could change consciousness, and which could sometimes help the sick. Modern pharmacology didn't appear out of nowhere. Its history is connected to a much older human relationship with nature, a relationship filled with discoveries, mistakes, traditions, and mysteries. So the next time you hear about a strange drug, remember, the story probably didn't begin in a modern laboratory. It may have started thousands of years ago, with a human being looking at a strange plant and asking one of the oldest questions in history. What happens if we try this? Sometimes the answer became medicine. Sometimes it became a legend. And sometimes it became a warning that survived for generations, because human history is full of substances that sound completely crazy until you realize people actually use them.